Hello, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Studio. We're gonna just give it another minute while people arrive. And then I'm gonna introduce our guest today. So it's a special treat. We have 3 guests here today. And Hangama being the center of it all right now.
This is Rachel.
Hi.
I guess you'll introduce.
Yeah, well, I can introduce this way too. Sure. Well,
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll just begin and then people will arrive. So my name is Yi Kin. I'm conducting the Beyond the Studios talk series, and tonight we have our guest Hangama, Muheb, and Rachel. So I'm just gonna go over briefly Hangama's background. So let me pull that up. So Hangama Amiri, born in Afghanistan in Kabul, 1989. She graduated with MFA at Yale University in 2020. That's my year, in Painting and Printmaking Department. She received her BFA from NSCAD. Is that pronounced NSCAD, right?
NSCAD.
University,
yes.
What's that?
Yeah, NSCAD.
NSCAD University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and is a Canadian Fulbright and postgraduate fellow at Yale University School of Arts and Sciences. Her work is exhibited nationally and internationally in New York City, Toronto, France, Italy, London, and Sofia, Bulgaria. She has won the 2011 Lieutenant Governor's Community Volunteerism Award, the 2013 Portia White Protege Award, and in 2015, her painting Island of Dreams won a runner-up honorable mention at RBC Canadian Painting Competition. Amiri was also an artist in residence at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, fall 2017. Joya AiR Residency Program in Almeri, Andalucia, Spain. That's 2017. World of Colorado Residency Program in Sofia. No, I'm sorry. World of CO Residency Program in Sofia, Bulgaria, and that's in 2018. And at Long Road Projects in Jacksonville, Florida. Currently, she has a show up right now in Albert's Benda, which is what you'll be seeing as Rachel walks around. Muheb Esmat is a curator and researcher currently based in Brooklyn, New York. He holds a master's degree from the Center for Curatorial Studies in Bard College. His work broadly focuses on visual and digital culture in contemporary Afghanistan. And Rachel Treader is the director of Albert's Benda. So take it away.
I just wanted to take a moment to welcome everyone to the gallery, at least virtually. We're so excited to be showing Hangama's first New York solo show. The show is up through May 1st and we're open. So for those of you who come, we'd love for you to see it in person. But in the meantime, I will be your camera woman as Hangama talks a little bit about her practice and specifically about the concepts of this show.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Take it away.
Thank you. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for being here and spending some time with us this evening. So since Rachel is doing the camera, I'm so happy that she's here. Thank you, Rachel. So this exhibition, I mean, some of you have been here in the space and some of you have not. But for those who haven't been in the space, I encourage them to come and see this show before it's going to be gone. The show title is Wandering Amidst the Colors, and it is based on my exploration of Afghan communities and other diaspora communities of New York. And it is pretty much covers kind of like an autobiographical body of work. And it is my relation about searching for home. It's been really interesting, or quite really interesting, to live in this pandemic world, almost a year. And I've been thinking a lot about home and the definition of home and how this definition of home became semi-blurred or it became more about feelings than more about like a physical territory. So for me, in order to find those attachment or find those belonging that shares a part of my childhood, it was necessary for me to travel outside of my studio in order to go into these communities and meet local people or Afghan people or Afghan American people in New York City. So pretty much like the overall exhibition or the landscape of this architecture kind of maps those geographies of this community as well. As you're entering in this space, you would see objects and images and language or text or like rice sacks. These are the things that I have witnessed in Flushings. And that was my other encounter with an Afghan American immigrant who owns this supermarket. It's called Kochi Supermarket. And I'm sure Esmat has been there too. And for me, it was really interesting to visit this space and take my time to observe what he had in the store and to kind of find myself in, related to certain objects that felt like home or that was like familiar to my eyes. And so that's how I kind of curated the show around products and food and baked goods and other textile material that I would see in that space. And it was quite interesting because working in a still life kind of project, they become also sort of like a portraiture for me. They are like portraits of foods and like questioning my relation with them as well. And from there you see the title of the Kochi market in this wall, and from there there's these rice sacks that I have created, and it has the imagery on these rice sacks are made by me, gathering amalgamations of different images or different cultural materials together and making them into the 3D object. From there, so from this space, we are entering to another space. It was really interesting because during this research, I would also visit Albertspend a few times to kind of get a sense of what sort of architecture it is and how I could see my textile pieces in here, and specifically this project. So it was interesting because there's like rooms within a room, and it also gives you a sort of lens through communities to communities, like doors to doors. So I really liked that aspect when I was working in this project and how I sort of curated the show as well. So we are entering in this space, and this space has two textile pieces. One is a representation of a fabric store that I usually go to. This is the fabric store that I have met and found during my studies at Yale in 2018. When I first also started making a lot of textile pieces. And this fabric store is also owned by an Afghan immigrant who had this store for more than 20 years. And for me, it was really interesting to have a conversation with him and share stories and to also introduce my work to him too. So I always buy my fabrics from him. And so that's why I pretty much represented his space to be part of this autobiographical body of work. This exists in the fashion districts, New York fashion district. And it's amazing space. There's so many fabrics. So I pretty much depicted maybe the 25% of his space because it's really big. There's a lot of fabrics, and it's like so many different sizes and levels of shelves that he had as well. But I am really privileged because whenever I visit his store, he has so many fabrics that I'm also familiar with. He doesn't have fabrics only from, Pakistan or South Asian countries, but also from Central Asian countries. That it makes me really excited to gather, to collect those fabrics that are also related to my childhood or to my, sort of like upbringing in these cultures. So I'm really happy whenever I met him and whenever I go to his space. And beside them, there's another small textile piece that encounters my visit with this Afghan American immigrant who lived more than 30 years. And he has this shop called the Nusrati Afghan Imports. And he was also someone that I met for the first time in here. And we shared a lot of great stories together. And it was really, it's like engaging with the same language. Even it gives you a sense of home, a sense of like belonging, a sense of some sort of like safety net as well. And he would share a lot of stories of when I met him for the first time. It was really interesting because he saw that I wasn't a student, so that's why he shared his memories of being a student in Kabul back in the 70s and how much freedom or access he had back then. And he never been back to Afghanistan since then too. So it was like a very emotional moment for me too. And so as we are entering to this other space, this one has a lot of depiction of the beauty salons. And these are the beauty salons that you could find in Jackson Heights, communities. And Jackson Heights is a very multicultural community, I would say. And when I was there, it felt like the smells of food, the sound, the noise, and so many people were still working, even though it's pandemic. So for me, being in that environment was really interesting. It kind of brought back those memories of being in the bazaars or in the bazaars of Afghanistan or even in Pakistan. So I guess the representation of salons are in my work and my previous work as well. So I somehow dedicated this space that as you're walking into these salons, windows by windows. And it was really interesting for me because when I was interacting with the employees in these spaces, they were all immigrants working, but from different cultures. But then at the same time, like when I would walk outside of these spaces, the representation or the ads or the advertisement images were very different compared to who were working inside the space, right? So there's like a stark difference of beauty politics that were happening in these windows too. So for me, again, like as an artist, I have that privileged position to flip the stories. And that's how I showed or represented more brown bodies in a sense that this is maybe their time to be treated, to be taken care of. So the overall exhibition that we just walked through it has this sort of like a journalistic or maybe diaristic approach to it, right? It's again about memory. It's about my relationship of going into these and walking into these communities and how I depict these, spaces through memory as well. And yeah, so this is like an overall walkthrough. But also something that I was really interested to add in the space was these small textiles that kind of occupy the doors. These are sort of like door decors that I use them. And it's like to kind of create a facade into the architecture that, like gives the viewer a sense of, privacy or publicity or like, like private or public. So you would engage in what sort of spaces you're in, or out. Yeah, so I'm gonna stop in here because I could keep on going. We can walk back as we could show them. And maybe, Muheb, if you have any questions for me, please go ahead.
Well, first, thank you so much for showing us. Honestly, congratulations. It's a wonderful show. I've been twice so far. Probably will be there again soon. And as just you were saying in the comments, it is something that it really triggered for me as walking around the show. It felt like I was walking in these spaces that it's supposed to represent in some ways, of course. And some of the things I think we'll talk about later is that this idea of like the objects that you bring in or the kind of images you bring in and how the lack of bodies and how I can see it in myself as the body walking around there. But to start, I think it might be, I know you kind of give us a bit of background into your practice before and also how you got into textiles. You mentioned you started working with textiles 2 years ago, basically. So can you just kind of tell us a little bit more about you painting before? I know you, first time we met at Yale, I saw some of your paintings and then I could see how the reflection in the paintings into these textile works. So something like that.
Sure. Of course, I guess I could speak that, about my relationship with art in general, how that been and how I came to using solely textile and fabric. I started, loving art from a really young age. I think my older brother is an artist, and he was an artist when I grew up too. And as a young age, just like looking at his drawings, and he would draw a lot of portraits. I would get so fascinated at how using a pencil as a tool to express so many things, right? To just, he would also draw a lot of Bollywood actresses and actors too. So I was really interested to see what he was doing. But also one of my cousins in Pakistan, he was also an artist. His name is Farid, and he actually graduated from an art school in Pakistan too, in Lahore. And he had a small studio in his basement. And he would always invite me and Hamid, my brother, to go there to see his drawings. And he had so many charcoal drawings, nude figures as well, which was really interesting because he always used to hide it from his mom. So he would get in trouble. But I guess it was really interesting, like to go down there and be introduced with his art. And I guess those were my first encounters to the art world, that how much a drawing could do about stories that I had. I would start drawing about my dreams. I would start drawing about the objects that I would see in every day. And so that's like my relationship with the art somehow started, and I stick with it since then. And from there, I would say my relationship with painting started when I was in Dushanbe, Tajikistan. I did a 2-year program in Olimov College of Art. It was a scholarship that I entered with, and I was introduced to use more watercolors, more gouache paintings, and also oil. But I kept continuing with oil paint for a long time, until when I immigrated to Canada as well. And at NSCAD University, I continued using the oil, but there was something still missing from the use of media. I always had a hard time to relate or reflect my memories by using oil paint. There was something that I was looking a lot about, how to capture the real texture of a fabric, or to capture the real sense of those fabrics that women used to wear back in Afghanistan or like Tajikistan. So in my paintings, having that there was like a distance relationship with my painting that I always had. And that's why when I started my Yale degree, I applied as a painter. But slowly, I think I began to question the materiality of the paint. And that's how I started to collaging or cutting fabrics or specific, textiles onto the painting. But then at the same time, I would have really hard time to see the compositions and how my memory would work on that frame. So I began to literally concentrate only on textiles and make my imagery out of textiles. It's also because the more I got closer to using fabric and the textile world, the more I got closer to those, fragile memories that I had. So I could start there, how my relationship with textile began as well. Mm-hmm.
Honestly, it's I see how this whole trajectory you take and the idea of memory and how important to your work is. But kind of coming back to what you're talking earlier about this, how you wanted to explore in the immigrant Afghan community in New York and the sense of identity, which I think I see a lot in your work, and how what happens when you're in a diasporic community, or the things you kind of give out, or the things you keep and the things you bring in. And it's something that I definitely could see in a lot of the works in this show. And do you what do you find in going to these spaces and going to Kochi market? I think the idea of the name itself, Kochi, which means
nomads, yeah.
It's taken as a last name too, but in this sense, and how the nomad in one land then ends up being in a different land. So if you can talk a little bit about this kind of like the things that disappear in moving to different spaces, or the things are there that then you can recognize when you were there. Like when you were at the market, this is something you recognize that brought back what you call memories, because I felt a lot of memories coming back walking around the space.
Thank you. I think that's a really important question, actually, and specifically in the context of this platform that we are in right now, beyond the studios, right? So something that not all of my bodies of work has been done from memory individually inside the studio, right? Working in this project particularly really allowed me to travel outside of my studio and to engage and meet local people in these communities, in the diaspora communities. So my relationship of somehow building a relationship with the communities that I left behind or that I missed a lot. So this really helped me to be back again and kind of observe those specific products or specific things that kind of reminded of home. So for me, entering myself into these diasporic spaces is also a relation to reconnect myself again, right? But I could say that, like, why am I so always interested in the spaces of like bazaars or beauty salons? It's also, there's a conversation of the community within the bigger societal aspect, right? There's a small community that happens in beauty salons, that community exists within the larger community of Jackson Heights, for example. So for me also, it was a kind of interesting relation even to experience being in salons in Kabul. It had a similar reflection of what I experienced being in salons in Jackson Heights. It's because you would see a similar representation of the beauty politics that were happening back there, and also you could see it here too. I would see a lot of postcards from Bollywood, postcards from Hollywood actresses inside the salons, but I saw a similar representation reflected in here too, in the windows, and you would see a lot of Caucasian bodies are represented that did not reflect the employees who were working inside these spaces. That was sort of like a one relation to connect the dot. But the other connection is also that since the overall landscape of this exhibition has also ideas of consumerism or ideas of bazaar, again, it also connects my memories of, growing up approximately closer to bazaar, even in Kabul, even in Pakistan, and even in like Dushanbe, Tajikistan. So for me, the ideas of being in that bazaar or in that environment also, reflects ideas of home and belonging. I hope I am.
Yeah, no, I think that's
like
this
yeah.
idea, like what you're talking about, commodities and
Mm-hmm.
kind of bazaars. What I see a contrast between what you are presenting to us, especially when we come to think about works. I think a little bit, maybe I'll show
Yeah.
later, trying to like somewhere here, this
Right.
idea of like commercialization. Usually it's like it tells us this idea of the future, but then
Right. Mm-hmm.
a diaspora community in a place where the past is so important, where what was there that we no longer have, this nostalgia, then it could also is that what I see here sometimes in the works and also in the material, that by how these elements that show a past then become a representative, something to sell to people, a way with people's interests, is really interesting to me. I don't know, what do you
Thank
thought?
you. I feel like I could also reference this because it always comes to my research a lot. I think a lot about heterotopia. Heterotopia is a term that was used by philosopher Michael Foucault, right? It was basically an idea of like a displacement of an object from its origin place, right? And you could see that how the idea of globalization works when we look at these products, right? The products are being moved or migrated from their own origin, but it came to our hand wherever we are, right? There's also another, it's heterotopia is also like a mirroring or like a world within a world. Like a bazaar is like a small world within a world, right? It creates it brings things and cultural products that you could be familiarized with, and you could go and have that exchange experience. And for me, like, I think a lot about that space and how I can also relate that to my body when I engage in these spaces, and what are my relationship with these products, and why they, bringing me these familiar experiences too. So it goes into those heterotopic experiences. I think it's called about the other spaces and what does other space does to me and does to my memory too. I hope it makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And I think something that I wanted to point out is that to me, like, as you know, like my interest in thinking about image and this idea of, like, for example, what I want to talk about here's this fact that in the right, you have this snippet of one of your works.
Right.
That was the title of the Blue Mosque in Mazar. And all of these works, every single work you're showing here becomes like a whole world of itself when we think about the histories that are ingrained in them. So for example, if I think about the Blue Mosque and its history and how it was created, that this place, it still exists on a myth. The myth is that Ali ibn Talib, who was the cousin of the Prophet, was after his death, transferred to Mazar in Afghanistan, and then this thing became a shrine. And the shrine has existed there forever sustained by this myth. Then in contrast, when you're looking at the fact the Bamiyan Buddhas in the left, I feel like it seems like the taller one, which was built in the 6th century, something that in recent memory we have thought about a lot and think about a lot in the sense of their destruction in 2001.
Of course, by the Taliban,
Yeah, and how the contrast between these two things, one survives and the other one is destroyed, and like the politics of what kind of beliefs survive and what kind of beliefs
don't.
And but it's still who then still recognizes themselves. The act of the destruction of Bamiyan isn't everyone's choice. It wasn't something that people still recognize this as them, as a symbol that could represent their memory or their identity. And the same thing with the Barak. I think that the Barak, or which is related basically a mythical.
It's showed in Islamic texts as well.
Exactly. So it comes from this thought of that the Barak, the Prophet Muhammad, and in the Quran says that he traveled to heaven.
With absolutely,
This horse that was a mix of different animals, and then it took a human shape later on in the 8th century, and like slowly, but then you see it here in a rice pack. And what does that mean? How a devotional image becomes this commodity that could be sold to people. The image of a commodity. It's kind of like, I think to me, it's very interesting, like how these little histories exist behind these works.
Yeah, I guess it also goes, I think that's really interesting how you describe this work. And it is pretty much how I'm also thinking and about this imagery and like colliding these imagery together. Or it's also like a way for me to create some sort of platform for this iconic imagery too, that I'm familiar through this culture, let's say. It's also introduced them in the visual art context. So for me, it's a way to play with the iconic imageries that maybe Western world are also familiar with as well, such as the Bamiyan, right? Bamiyan was like a huge head, when it was destroyed by the Taliban. So it had this kind of like a really global announcement, sort of news fact, right? So for me, just using these iconic that this specifically treasury still exists in that world, but now I'm bringing it in the rice sack. And you might see these images in the actual rice sack, or you might not. But I am here to kind of have the space to, bring these amalgamations together and, like trying to make a sense of it as well.
I think it's like kind of maybe the idea of just images and icons and like what kind of things do we see and what we don't see. Like to me here, like if you can speak a little more and like the
Sure.
contrast between the central image here where in Qarqa, and then you have these archival images from a magazine and like who they are.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Again, I think like when I even use, let's say, archival images or archival copies or whatsoever, it's because a reason for me to contextualize them in the through cultural or historical into my work, right? So specifically in this piece, it has a landscape of an Afghan couple sightseeing in Qarqa and Kabul, and a yellow boat swan, which we usually saw. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with that as well. But then this landscape is attached with two other archival kind of cover pages from Jivandun magazine, and Jivandun magazine was really popular magazine back in the early 40s to 70s and 80s, I would say. And they would, I guess, like it's also like a very maybe propaganda magazine that were used back then too, that they always, majority of time really focused in Kabul, in the politics of Kabul and the progressiveness that were happening around women. So in this image particularly, I chose two women, but this is particularly woman is Yusuf Dawood, who was the first Miss Afghanistan in 1979, I think, before the Russian invasion. He won as a first place in Miss Afghanistan. I'm sure you know her as well. And because I was doing a research a few years back at Yale, and she was part of my research. And when I was like researching more images, I found her image in the cover of one of the magazine issue, which is the Jivandun. So for me, again, that's why I'm, working through memory. Again, it allows me to also play, to bring archival images in conversation with the contemporaneous of, like Afghanistan or Kabul city or what's happening. It's also like a way that it opens a dialogue into the intergenerational aspect of it too. So for me, if my mom and if my mother, comes to the show, and if they could relate to these images, then there's like a dialogue that I might have, right, with them. So it allows me to also make a platform for them to be part of this art history and part of this art context as well.
I think, like, speaking of like what you were talking about, your parents or your family coming into the show, it's kind of interesting. It's important to mention the fact that what you're doing in not it's only thinking about outside the studio.
Yeah.
The practice on, like, it fits into something that it doesn't seen as high art, or even in the Western context, how many works of textile we see in galleries being exhibited or museums and painting. So I wonder, like, what are some challenges or the way you approach to this that you still want them to see these works and understand them and take them seriously?
Yeah, it's like a kind of similar experience that I am working with these imagery and these fragmented other wall images as well, right? It's like my relationship with these spaces and what that means, how I understand these mosques or these historical places, right? So it's again, I'm bringing a dialogue with past and present in order to make a space for them too.
I think maybe you can go back to this like dialogue. Something else, like maybe the question that has like been going through my mind is that this here, I could think we could see that there's like a division maybe in my head, that I've seen a connection that like you tend to abstract, work in this kind of like cutting and piecing together in these works. And then, but when we come to something like this, it seems there's a lot more figurative.
Right.
Like, I don't know if it's like intentional, if there are things you can feel comfortable in chopping up and putting together, and things that you feel like they ought to be very representational.
Yeah, I think the dialogue between Yeah, figurative and then abstract, the other images that you just showed. It's how I work through memories. Something when I work through memories, if it's specifically talking about Afghanistan or Pakistan or those countries that I've lived, they become a little bit a specific lens that I have to see, and maybe much more simpler lens. But when I work in, for example, those window shops that I saw, the images, it was exactly the thing I have seen in those spaces. They were really mixed of images colliding together. So I kind of took those aspects and brought it back to my textiles. But I do have, or I have worked with the abstract notion in my works in the past. Again, it's again how I work through memory. Memory doesn't have a finished narrative. It doesn't have the start or the end, right? It starts in the beginning, it starts in the middle, and it stays in the middle. So it talks a lot about the in-betweenness for me. So that's how I use when I work on certain theme or subject, and that's how the memory kind of works through those layers or through those threads.
I guess it's kind of in this fact that if we are working through memory, then it's already some abstract in some ways.
Right.
And that if you abstract and like chop it up even more and in a way that like bring in multiple, then it feels like it's already been done, that being away from the place so far or being in a distance, that often feel like, at least in my experience, that I always have to recheck myself in thinking about stuff, that I'm always worried that there's like how much do I trust my I could see that, I guess, for what you're explaining.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point too, Muheb. It's also like, I mean, growing up not only in one country, like growing up through several countries, this sort of like experience of migrant body or displaced body, it kind of connects really closely to how I think about fragmentations too when I work in these, like when I make these type of textile pieces. It's fragmentation again connects with how I work with memory and how I see myself as these fragmented bodies or as fragmented identities. And that's how I collect, and it's amalgamations of so many different things, not only one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I like
think
the idea how you say the rechecking the self often again, and that's how I usually do, rechecking my memories. Whenever I go back, I have to revisit in order to see what had happened there, what sort of event it was, so.
yeah, no, I think and that's just kind of like to try to be mindful of the time. So maybe I have one more question. This is like the still lifes that you have on show right now. If you could talk a little bit more about this and then how you thought in like something so simple. And first of all, I think it's like it brings in a different object into the still life in a way that you have adapted this long held practice that has always been there. And you have brought in things that I could associate with, or things that I couldn't see a certain in the kebabs in this one. And then you have the grapes and in the other piece, and like how, like if you can talk a little bit more about these pieces.
Yeah, specifically, I'm actually going to the space to see and talk. Yeah, this wall was really interesting because again, like food is food, and it's part of the culture. Smell is also part of the memory, right? So for me, it was also exciting to bring the language of still life in my work, because I don't think I have done this before through textile, and it became really exciting because when I would work with them, they became like self-portraits again. It's bigger, they're not real size. A kebab is not that big in reality, but they have this enlargement body in them, right? They become the portraits. And it's something also really new, maybe in the textile art as well. And yeah, I would see these products specifically in the flushings, and then I would juxtapose them in using, kind of depiction of different fabrics or cultural fabrics that kind of connotates that oh, what is the context of this fabric from, right? So it has that, again, amalgamation of my relationship with that specific or particular food or baked goods, but then the background is attached to these cultural materials, right? Mm-hmm.
No, I think it's beautiful. Honestly, it's like
Thank
impressive,
you.
simple, but how impactful in like
Mm-hmm.
the ways that I could or one could identify with these things that we often take for granted, and but also are a very big part of our lives. And
Right.
when you think about it, is that like, for example, like a personal story is like that I love going to these places, and like
Sure. You live in New York. I'm jealous.
but
There's so many good restaurants. Uh-huh.
there are ways connections that if I think about it, is that if you go to Manhattan and you go to all
Right.
these parts or like the restaurants, there often you will be, it's easy, likely one of the ways to find Afghans. Is that a lot of, there are a big number who work in this industry, and like I think, but in some ways, but beyond that, I think this idea of like what food means, what hospitality means, and how you present yourself is something that is more important.
Thank you. It's also, I mean, again, remembering about the home food is the main thing, right? We are very foodie people. I mean, I grew up in a household that my mom would cook like, 24-hour amazing food, and I really missed her food too. So when I was going into these communities and finding and smelling, it really brought a lot of memories back. And it was, again, a gesture of revisiting those moments, right? Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, we can sit here and talk about all these works again.
Thank you.
Over an hour longer, but I think maybe we can take some of the questions since we have 15 minutes left on this. Yes.
Yeah, so it'll be great to open it up for questions. I see we have some questions in the chat.
Sure,
so
please.
we can start with those, and then y'all can either raise your hand and ask, and just unmute yourselves. But we could start with Carol here. It says, did I see an image of Al Barak in one of these works of yours? Okay. And then Robert has a question as well. Do you want to ask it yourself, or I could read it, Robert?
I can ask it, thanks. Yeah, I'm just
sure.
Thank you very much. I went
Hi,
to
Robert. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I went with Muheb to see the show. I have two questions. The first is particularly the one of the textile store where you have different textiles. I'm just wondering in terms of identity, like cultural identity, when you have textiles from other cultures, how do you think about that, including those when they might mean different things to different people? And then just how you connect that in terms of like an immigrant identity. And then the second question is just about how you approach making the compositions of the pieces.
Right, of course. My relationship with gathering these different fabrics from different countries or specific countries is because I have also lived and know the culture, or know the language, or wear the clothing, right? So there's like a still these fragmented identities that I have in these countries. So that's why when I bring these collective of fabrics, it gives me a sense of wholeness, right? Again, these are fragmented identities that I'm gathering as each fabric becomes its own portrait in the pieces. Yeah, and the other question you asked me about was the frame of them, right? Yeah, again, I love, when I work, I love thinking about fragmentation. Fragmentation is a thing that doesn't have a perfect edge. It doesn't have a perfect line or frame, right? Once you take the canvas outside of the frame, for example, it becomes on its own, right? It becomes fabric with like whoopily-woppy kind of edges. And I love that because it really resonates how I work with memory. So most of the textiles, they become its own fragment being. It's a piece of that memory, or it's a piece of that place than as a whole. And majority of times, I don't have control of those last edges that happens, because there's a lot of happy accidents that comes when I finish the work. And sometimes I revisit back these pieces, and if I want to cut half of it or like edges of it, I do it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think I am interested in the imperfectionism of the edges than the being perfect. Yeah, it's something that I think a lot about. Mm-hmm.
Maybe I think it's something that like you,
Sure.
there's knowing the fact that the importance of the textile in the, maybe not in the West, because everything we buy, all our shirts made, we buy our clothes
Exactly.
made. In the context of where we come from, now, of course, there's a lot of ready-made clothes, but there's a point that we bought textiles and then took into the tailor, and it's still a comment.
It is still a comment, yeah.
So in that sense, that is very important to take into consideration. Then how the textile and that interaction and the transaction becomes a lot more important and personal, but and the styles that come with it and the things that these represent further than just kind of a textile.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point, Muheb. Even I guess I have shared this story with you as well. Even when I went to this store specifically, when I met the owner, I was going there to search for Afghan handmade textile, and the person said that, you know, unfortunately, like, we don't make any textile from Afghanistan, because again, when the secondhand material got really popularized in these communities from the West, you know, coming to the East. So majority of these places or countries lost their original, you know, textile factories, and Afghanistan was one of them maybe. And he was like, yeah, unfortunately, we don't make any textiles, but we take our textile from our neighboring countries, from Pakistan or Turkey or China as well.
Well, yeah, I think that's the fact that of the import and export exchange too is that
absolutely
cheaper things could be imported, but then it's also the fact that there used to be fabric productions in Bahar, and then I'm sure somewhere in the north too, there are 2 textile factories that went out of business because of the turmoil. And it's like some of that is also that happened as a consequence of the times around it, that opened the door for things from outside to be more popular.
Absolutely. But I guess in these pieces, like, I'm just gathering those specific cultural materials that I am familiar with as well, you know, that I could still feel connected to the culture that I've grown up. So it's difficult to find handmade Afghan textiles, but one of my dreams is actually to go back to Central Asian countries and kind of learn how to do ikat prints. And it would be fascinating.
And we have another question here from Huma. Would you like to ask it yourself, or I could read it from the chat box?
You can ask the question, but I just want to say it's so beautiful, Hangama.
Thank you, Ma.
But I also just realized,
sure,
looking at this one, the fabrics, that I think it looks like it's missing shadows. I think it's really interesting, because I think if you were to paint this, it wouldn't quite work, I think, because they would just be really big, like colorful abstract shapes. So also it's interesting with the fabric that, like, the fabric has its own natural shadow.
Yeah.
I don't know, have you thought about that?
Yeah, I think about those a lot, and I also play with the shadows around fabric too. I could show you like a really close-up thing, like, for example, some of these edges. I don't know if you could come close, Rachel. Like, some of these edges are actually hand painted to kind of differentiate the hue. So I do go back and create some small bits of you know, shadows in order, like, to bring the subject in front more, right? To give them some sort of like depth and weight. But again, fabric is a really tactile thing that it is in its own form, and whatever sorts of light you will put on top of them, they will have their, their own shadows and form and body, I guess. Like, for example, just, the light is shining in this polyester fabric, as even when you move around, it changes. So it has a lot of like liberation of how form, shifts shapes too. So, yeah.
So the question was, when you are in the initial stages of planning the images texturally and compositionally, do you ever feel they get too constrictive or not open enough when you are sketching them? And she wants to see your sketchbook.
Oh, that's so amazing.
The feeling of absence seems like an important one for these works, especially if it is about remembrance and recollection. So what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. I guess I could just wrap it like how I draw. I mean, I draw a lot. I make so many multiple sketches to choose which one I want to make textile. Specifically this one, since most of my drawing also has like color, because I need palette. So I think also really painterly too. Like my approaches to my practice is also really painterly. For majority of the pieces, they're all painted on gouache or watercolor too. So, and then that's why I, bring my sketches in these fabric stores in order to collect those palette specific colors. But for this piece specifically, I didn't do any coloring. It was just pencil drawing. And the shape of the drawing also had a similar frame to it as well, because I also cut my drawings too if I see a negative space that I don't need or that I want to add. So in itself has its own collage. So yeah, the choice of the colors in this specific work came during the process as I was working to it. So sometimes it's really planned, but sometimes it's not. Yeah. I hope it answers.
Seeing the drawings, I think they're equally is great. Honestly, it really is beautiful how you can transfer the two things.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any more questions? You could just raise your hand and speak up. But if not, I have a question.
Sure.
And maybe both Rachel and Hangama can answer this as well. So I'm just wondering what the relationship of, hey Rachel, I'm wondering what the relationship of the gallery director and the artist can be, and also as like a gallery director, or even just a gallery. To me, a gallery is a frame, right? The same way that perhaps a curator could frame a show, or Hangama framed her work. I'm wondering, like, how do you frame these voices, and how do you frame the relationship of the artist to the world of art, right? The world of images. So I'm just wondering what your relationships in the gallery world is, because to me, there's a lot of relationship between the artist, the curator, and the space.
Do you mind if I start?
Yeah, go for it. It's for you.
Well, it's a multi-tiered question, but I would say for Hangama's show, we did sort of discuss how this might be a departure from other bodies of work, but it was really largely her vision in terms of exploring the communities in Jackson Heights. It was really, I guess, topical in that being in COVID had this impetus to seek out home when she couldn't physically go back even to Canada. It's like a second home. It's not the original home that she's referencing a lot of the time, but finding it in a third locale. And then in terms of sort of how that fits in larger with gallery relationships, I mean, this gallery in particular, we're increasingly exploring different types of materiality, whether that's ceramic, textile, or even in painting, artists who are really interested in what it means to be a painter. So I saw her work fitting in there, but in addition to that, I think there's just so many different ways you can approach the work, whether it's through discussions of representation, discussions of materiality, discussions of globalization, of gender. It's really approaching all of this through a very personal, but also a pretty accessible lens, which I thought was amazing. So.
I guess I could answer that question in relation, just having the opportunity to show or to bring my work for the community of New York for the first time as well. It was a way for me to introduce myself as well in the community. And also bring these communities that I'm working and bringing it into the context of Chelsea. So something that we don't usually see such, type of representation too. So it was a really great opportunity for me to bring my work in the space like Albert Spenda. So it's been a great collaboration so far. So thank you, Rachel. I hope it answers the question.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, if we have 2 minutes left, if anyone has any more questions. Otherwise, we can call it as it is. But I'm also really curious because I didn't hear much about Muheb's practice as a curator. Just a few words on just the fragmentation as the images that you see here, as well as I think I spoke with you briefly about social media in Afghanistan and how those could sort of collide, right? Because they're
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of relevance in there because basically my curatorial interests or research interests, a lot of it is aligns in this fact of you have a huge diaspora community in a country that is so many people have migrated. One of the things that I've looked into, and that's where the social media thing comes in, is that how do you form identities then when you are in these spaces so far away, and the chances of going back and a lot of times are so limited. But then now you have internet, and of course understanding what the internet does, that it's democratic but it's not democratic. It's also thinking about what kind of information is there, and then how do you build yourself around that information. But in reality, there's a lot of pieces missing, and who gets to be on the internet is still some kind of privilege. So I think that's where this, like what Hangama has done here, and to me, my interest in like understanding how do we form our visions of who we are in a sense, or who do we want to be when we are so far away from a space come. But beyond that, I think as a curator, like I think a lot of it, my dedication to this cause is that the fact that I grew up in this country and like my interests grew up from there. And like I love, and then there's also the need is, I think, a biggest part of it is that we need to speak about these things. We need to talk about and contemplate what we're going through and what we are showing people, or what is being shown about us. And that comes to the idea of images, and my interest in like how we are being framed, or how we frame ourselves for people to see and identify as. So a lot of these things come back and forth in thinking, where, like, what does it mean to be in Afghanistan itself, or what does it mean to be outside and still kind of long for this place, but also in a different context where you're first generation or second generation. And there's a lot to be thought about. There's a lot to be appreciated about. And I think that's where I have been digging into for the past 2 years, and trying to understand and trying to interact and learn, and kind of from people like Hangama, and like being able to interact and like know her and see her practice, and like the things that she's thinking about is also equally, for me, it's been like kind of energizing in a way, that in appreciating that the kind of work other people are putting into this. So I'm very grateful that she's doing this and this shows up and for people to see, but there's a lot more work to be done.
Thank you, Muheb. Likewise.
Yeah, thank you all so much. It's been an honor, and thank you everyone for attending. Come back in 2 weeks. We have another guest, Devin K. Kenny, who's a Brooklyn-based artist, and he does a lot of, he's amazing. So just keep a watch out for that. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Thank you guys so much for being here.